The chandelier light glittered over crystal glasses and gold-trimmed china as Jason raised his champagne flute. The rooftop terrace of the Benson estate buzzed with polite laughter, the kind reserved for the wealthy, pretending to be kind. "To family values," my son said loudly, his voice cutting through the chatter. "To fairness, to giving everyone what they deserve." The crowd cheered, glasses clinking. I stood near the back, holding my wine, watching him beam like a man who had just conquered something. Then Jason turned to me with a charming grin that didn't reach his eyes. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a crisp, white envelope. "Dad," he said, stepping closer, "you always taught me about fairness. Here's the bill for the Maldives trip, $300,000. It's only fair you contribute." The laughter that followed was the kind that burned. Polite, shallow, cruel. I looked at him for a long moment, the music suddenly distant. My hand didn't tremble when I took the envelope. I even smiled. "Fairness, huh?" I said quietly. "I'll remember that." Around us, the chatter picked back up, the band resumed, and Jason clapped a friend on the back as if he hadn't just humiliated his own father. I stayed where I was while the crowd dissolved into little groups again. Glasses raised, gossip blooming like smoke. The night air was heavy with the scent of expensive perfume and arrogance. Jason moved effortlessly from one cluster of people to another, the perfect son-in-law, the perfect businessman. He belonged here. Or, at least he thought he did. I, on the other hand, was the relic at the edge of the room, the man everyone politely acknowledged and then forgot. When the band switched to a slower tune, I drifted toward the balcony. Below me, Lake Washington shimmered under the lights, dark and endless. I thought about the countless nights I'd worked overtime so Jason could attend private school, the long drives to college, visits the mortgage I'd carried, so he could start fresh without debt. Fairness. The word tasted bitter. "Dad?" Jason's voice came from behind me, still smooth, still confident. He had a glass in one hand, the same smug grin on his face. "Don't take it personal, okay? It was just a joke. Everyone knows how these things go." I turned toward him. "A joke that cost me my dignity," he laughed softly. "Come on, Dad. Don't be dramatic. It's just money. You don't even need it. You live alone, your house is paid off, and let's be honest, you've got nothing else to spend it on. Think of it as helping the family image." I stared at him, really stared at the tailored suit, the custom watch glinting under the lights, the self-satisfaction radiating off him like heat. "You sound just like your father-in-law," I said finally. Jason's smile faltered for a fraction of a second. "Thomas built an empire, Dad. You should respect that." "I respect builders," I said quietly. "Not buyers." He sighed, rolled his eyes, and patted my shoulder as though I were the child. "Don't take everything so seriously. Clara says you worry too much. Maybe just enjoy yourself for once." Then he turned away, his phone already in his hand, his mind already elsewhere. I watched him go, swallowed the rising ache in my throat, and looked back over the water. The reflection of the estate lights shimmered on the waves, distorted but beautiful. Somewhere inside the mansion, laughter erupted again, bright and hollow. I finished my wine in one swallow and placed the empty glass on the railing. When I finally went back inside, the party was thinning out. Guests drifted toward their cars, still murmuring about business and vacations and tax shelters. Jason was saying goodbye to his father-in-law, their handshake firm, their smiles rehearsed. Clara, my daughter-in-law, caught my eye from across the room. Her expression was polite, sympathetic, even, but distant. The kind of look you give someone you pity but can't defend. As I passed her on my way to the door, she said softly, "Jason didn't mean to embarrass you." I paused, looking at her. "Didn't he?" She hesitated, then lowered her gaze. "He's under a lot of pressure. You know how he is." "Yes," I said, "I do." Outside, the night was quiet except for the soft hum of luxury cars pulling away. I stood at the edge of the driveway watching the taillights disappear into the trees. The envelope in my jacket pocket felt heavier than it should have. When the last car had gone, I pulled it out and opened it under the porch light. Inside was a printed invoice, $300,000, with the Benson Travel and Leisure logo stamped in gold at the top. There was even a handwritten note at the bottom. "Thanks for being part of the family." I laughed low and bitter. For a moment I considered tearing it up, but instead I folded it neatly and slipped it back into the envelope. Evidence, I thought, for what I didn't know yet. Back home, the silence hit differently. My house, though modest, was clean, organized mine. I hung up my coat, poured a small glass of bourbon, and sat in my armchair. The envelope lay on the coffee table, staring back at me like a dare. I could almost hear Jason's voice again. "It's only fair, Dad." I took a slow sip, feeling the warmth spread through my chest. Fairness. Maybe he was right. Maybe it was time I learned what fairness really meant, and maybe he would too. I opened my notebook, the one I used for old engineering sketches, and wrote down a single sentence across the page. Fairness begins with consequences. When I closed the book, the house felt less empty. I looked around at the quiet walls, the faint hum of the refrigerator, the distant sound of rain starting outside. I thought of all the bridges I had built in my life, real ones, steel and concrete, and how every bridge only stood when both sides held firm. That night, as I turned off the lights, I said softly to no one in particular, "You'll learn what fair really means, son." Then I smiled. Not the kind of smile that comes from anger, but the kind that comes from certainty. Rain tapped softly against the kitchen window as I stared at the untouched envelope on the table. The same one Jason had handed me 5 nights ago, like a receipt for my worth. His words, "It's only fair," still echoed, hollow and smug. Fairness. The word used to mean something else when I said it. It used to mean work hard, earn what you get, give back what's owed. Now it sounded like a joke told at my expense. The morning light crept into the room, cold and gray. The kind of light that makes old wood floors look tired. I poured coffee and tried not to think about him. But memory has a way of replaying scenes, whether you want it to or not. I remembered when Jason was 8, sitting on the floor of my old workshop, trying to glue 2 pieces of scrap wood together. He had that determined little frown that mirrored mine. "See, Dad," he'd said proudly, "fairness means everyone gets to build something." I had laughed then, proud and naive. Somewhere along the line, he stopped building and started taking. My phone buzzed, breaking the silence. Jason's name glowed on the screen. I hesitated before answering. "Morning, Dad," he said cheerfully, too cheerfully. "About the other night, don't take it so seriously." "I was humiliated in front of 50 people, I said quietly. "Come on, it was just a joke." Everyone laughed. "Yes," I said. They laughed. He sighed like I was the one being unreasonable. "Look, Dad, you've got to stop being so sensitive." "I'm under a lot of pressure with the business, and the Bensons expect a certain image. You know how it is." "No, Jason," I said. "I don't think I do." "Well, maybe you would if you hadn't checked out of the real world." That one hit. There was no anger in his voice, just condescension. He truly believed he was explaining life to me. "You seem to think money makes the world real," I replied. "But money's just metal and paper. Respect, that's real." He chuckled softly, the sound of someone who'd already moved past the conversation. "Anyway, I didn't mean anything by it. Clara said you seemed upset, but I told her you'd get over it. You always do." "I'm sure you did," I said. When he hung up, I sat for a long time, staring at the rain streaking down the window. There was no anger left, just the dull ache of recognition. My son wasn't a boy anymore. He was a man made of charm and calculation, someone who had learned how to weaponize politeness. A few hours later, a knock came at the door. Clara stood there, flawless as ever, holding a sleek gift bag with gold ribbons. "Henry," she said softly, "I wanted to stop by." I gestured for her to come in. She placed the bag on the counter. Inside was a bottle of aged whiskey with a small note from the Benson family with gratitude. "They wanted to thank you," she said, "for helping Jason with the Maldives surprise." "Helping?" I asked. She hesitated. "Well, contributing, I suppose. It really meant a lot to everyone." I smiled thinly. "Yes, I imagine it did." She tried to hold my gaze, but couldn't. "Jason didn't mean to hurt you. He's been under a lot of stress. The business expansion hasn't gone as planned. So the humiliation was stress relief." Her eyes darted away. "You know how men can be when they're trying to prove themselves." I nodded slowly. "Yes, I do. That's why I recognize it." When she left, the silence in the house thickened again. I took the whiskey out of the bag, set it on the shelf, and stared at it. It looked expensive, beautiful even, but somehow it reeked of apology. An apology not meant for forgiveness, but for convenience. That night, I walked out to my workshop in the backyard. The air smelled of rain and cedar. The old radio on the shelf crackled with static. I turned it off and stood there for a while, looking at the worn tools, the wooden frame I never finished building after my wife died. Jason used to sit right there, legs swinging, asking questions about how bridges worked. "They stand," I'd told him, "because both sides carry the weight." I ran my hand along the bench and whispered, "Ours collapsed a long time ago." When I returned to the house, the answering machine light blinked red. A message from the bank. I pressed play. "Mr. Walker, this is Susan from Evergreen Credit. We wanted to confirm the co-signed loan extension that was submitted under your name last week. Please call us back to verify the signature." I froze. Co-signed loan. My name. My signature. I hadn't signed anything in months. I went to my desk, opened the drawer, and pulled out the envelope from the party. Inside, behind the invoice, was a copy of my signature on a scanned form. It was perfect, too perfect. A slow, cold anger filled my chest. The kind that doesn't make you shout, just makes you think clearly for the first time in years. I called Susan back and told her calmly, "That document isn't mine. Please freeze any pending transactions until I arrive." When I hung up, I sat there for a long time, breathing deeply. Jason's voice echoed in my head again. "It's only fair, Dad." By the next morning, I had already made a decision. Not the kind born of rage, but the kind built on resolve. I needed to understand every piece of what he had done, and then decide how to make it right my way. I drove to the bank. Susan met me with a concerned expression and handed over the file. "I thought it looked unusual," she said, pointing at the signature. "It's a perfect imitation." I studied it closely. The loops, the slant, it was mine, down to the last detail except for one thing. Jason had rushed it. The final stroke was shorter, the ink lighter. I smiled grimly. "That's him, always in a hurry." She handed me copies of every related document. "Do you want to press charges?" "Not yet," I said. "I just want to see where the money leads." Back home, I laid the papers across the dining table. Rows of numbers, transfers, signatures, each one a breadcrumb on a trail my son had left behind. But this time I wouldn't follow blindly. I would map it, understand it, build something from it. That night, as the rain turned to mist, I opened my old engineering notebook again. On the next blank page, under the words, "Fairness begins with consequences," I wrote another line, "Fairness ends when trust is stolen." I looked at the words until they blurred, then closed the book gently. Somewhere deep inside, a part of me that had stayed dormant for years stirred awake. I didn't know what would come next, but for the first time, I wasn't afraid of the silence. Outside, the rain stopped completely. The world felt clean again, ready for reconstruction. I turned off the lights and whispered into the dark. You've mistaken kindness for weakness, Jason. You won't make that mistake again. The sharp hum of my table saw stopped mid-cut when I heard the car door slam outside. Through the open garage window, I saw the black SUV parked crookedly against the curb. Jason stepped out, crisp suit-polished shoes, and that sauce, that same impatient energy that filled every room he entered. I wiped sawdust from my hands, waiting. He didn't knock. He never did. The side door creaked open, and he stepped inside like he still lived there. Dad got a minute. His tone wasn't a question. I kept my back to him, shutting off the power switch. Sure, I said. I guess you're here to tell me fairness has another price tag. He chuckled softly. Don't start, Dad. I actually came to clear the air. I turned to face him. He was scrolling through his phone, not even pretending to make eye contact. It's been a long week, he continued, slipping into a stool by the workbench. You were right. Maybe that party thing went too far. Clara thinks I should apologize. Apologize or explain, I asked. He glanced up with a half smile. A bit of both, maybe. You see, the Maldives trip, well, that wasn't really personal spending. It was business promotion. Appearances matter, especially with the Bensons' clients. Appearances, I repeated. Right. And how does my money help your image? He leaned forward, hands spread like a salesman, mid-pitch. Come on, Dad. You don't need all that cash just sitting there. You've got the house paid off, no debts, no responsibilities. You could help your son out one last time. Help, I said slowly, or bail you out. He gave that half laugh he used whenever he didn't like where the conversation was going. Don't twist it. It's just a temporary thing. The expansion cost more than expected. You always told me to take risks. I told you to measure them, I said. He sighed, annoyed. You're being dramatic again. It's just business, Dad. Business built on fake signatures. That got his attention. His eyes narrowed, fingers tightening on the phone. What are you talking about? I got a call from the bank, I said. About a co-signed loan extension. My name was on it. My signature wasn't. He froze for half a second, then recovered fast. Oh, that he said, with a nervous laugh. Clerical mistake. They reused old paperwork. You know how banks are. I know exactly how banks are, I said. That's why I called them myself. He opened his mouth, closed it again. His jaw clenched, and I could see the irritation flicker across his face like a passing shadow. You didn't have to do that. You're making things complicated. No, Jason, I said calmly. You already did that. He stood, running a hand through his hair, pacing like a caged animal. Look, it's not what you think. I just needed something to show the investors, all right? A little leverage until the next quarter. I'll fix it. Fix it, I repeated. Like you fixed the last 3 temporary problems. He slammed his hand on the workbench. I'm your son, Dad. Your only family. You're supposed to have my back. The echo hung in the air. I could feel my heartbeat slow and steady. I had your back, Jason, I said softly. For 30 years. Maybe that's why you never learned to stand on your own. He turned away, his voice sharp. You're unbelievable. I'm trying to keep everything together, and you're lecturing me like I'm 16. 16 was the last time you listened, I said. He laughed bitterly, the sound hollow. You just don't get it. The world's changed, Dad. Success isn't about who works the hardest anymore. It's about who plays the smartest. Then play smarter, I said. Without stealing. His eyes flashed, but he forced a smile. All right. Let's not fight. Tell you what, let me bring you some papers tomorrow just to clarify everything. Sign them and I'll clean this mess up myself. You won't have to lift a finger. I'll take a look, I said evenly. Bring them by. Great. He exhaled in relief, mistaking my calm for compliance. Thanks, Dad. I knew I could count on you. When he left, the workshop smelled of damp sawdust and tension. The door swung shut behind him, leaving me alone with the sound of rain starting on the roof. I stood still for a while, the echo of his footsteps fading into the distance. That night I called Mark Davies. He picked up on the second ring. Henry Walker, he said, voice half amused, half surprised. Haven't heard that name in months. What's wrong? Need your legal brain, I said. About my son, I replied. And a piece of paper he wants me to sign. There was a pause, then a low whistle. Sounds messy. Not yet, I said, but it will be. We met the next morning at our old coffee spot near the waterfront. Mark looked mostly the same silver hair eyes that could still cut through lies. I laid out the situation in detail, every number, every document. He listened without interrupting. When I finished, he tapped his pen against the table. He's smart, I'll give him that, he said finally. But pride always leaves fingerprints. Let him bring you the papers. We'll make sure those prints work against him. You're suggesting I play along. I'm suggesting you stop protecting him from consequences, he said. You've built bridges your whole life, Henry. Maybe it's time you learned how to burn one the right way. I looked out at the gray water beyond the window. I'm not looking for revenge, Mark. I know, he said quietly. You're looking for fairness. I smiled faintly. Exactly. When I returned home, the clouds had broken sunlight glinting on the wet pavement. Jason's car was already in the driveway. He stood by the porch holding a leather folder. Morning, he said too casually. Got those papers we talked about? I led him inside, offered coffee, and watched as he spread the documents across my table. The same confident hands, the same practiced charm. It's just procedural, he said. Keeps things clean between business and family. I nodded, scanning the first page without a word. My eyes caught the familiar slant of a clause near the bottom, language meant to obscure ownership rights. You wrote this yourself, I asked. He hesitated. Mostly. My attorney helped draft it. Of course, I said. I signed the top page slowly, carefully, exactly where he told me to. He looked satisfied. That's all I needed. Thanks, Dad. When he left, I placed my copy of the papers in a manila envelope marked evidence, then called Mark. It's done, I said. Good, Mark replied. Now let him hang himself with his own rope. I hung up and stood at the window watching Jason's SUV disappear down the street. For the first time in years, I didn't feel powerless. I wasn't angry anymore, just focused. On the table, the fresh signature gleamed under the light. My own handwriting, but this time on my terms. Fairness, I murmured, closing the folder. Starts now. Seattle's sky was the color of steel when I stepped into the cafe near the waterfront. The place smelled like burnt espresso and old secrets, perfect for what I needed. Mark was already there, sitting by the window with 2 coffees waiting. He gave me that look lawyers have, the one that says, I already know this is going to get complicated. Morning, he said. You've got that storm in your pocket expression again. He brought me the papers, I told him, sliding the folder across the table. Said it would keep things clean. Mark flipped through the pages, scanning with quiet precision. Sloppy, he muttered. He copied the clause structure from an old partnership agreement. Left out 2 disclosures, which means, he said, smirking. If he files this with the bank, he'll be signing away more than he realizes. I leaned back. I don't want to ruin him, Mark. I just want him to stop. Henry. Mark said, lowering his voice, some men only stop when they hit the wall they built themselves. You're just making sure it's sturdy. The rain began to fall harder, drumming against the glass. I watched the gray waves roll in from the sound. What if I sign another copy? I said one that looks identical but carries a clause that protects my assets. Mark raised an eyebrow. A mirror contract? Exactly. He grinned. I like how your engineering brain works. We spent the next hour drafting it. Mark's pen moved fast across the paper drawing lines and adding legal subtext that only someone like Jason would skim right over. At the bottom, we added a reversal clause. Any use of my name or property for financial leverage without explicit permission would trigger automatic transfer of ownership back to me. It was poetic justice written in ink. When we were done, Mark pushed the folder toward me. You sure you're ready for this? I nodded. I've spent years solving problems for other people. It's time I solve one for myself. He smiled the kind of smile that hides worry. Then let's make sure you never have to do it twice. That evening, Jason called. Hey, Dad, you got a chance to look over the agreement I did, I said evenly. You were right. It'll make things easier. Why don't you come by tomorrow? We'll finalize it. Perfect, he said, relief flooding his voice. I'll bring a notary. We'll make it official. Good, I said. Let's make it official. After I hung up, I poured myself a drink and sat in the quiet of the living room. The house felt different now, less like a prison, more like a headquarters. The envelope from the party still sat on the shelf unopened since that night. I pulled it down, stared at the gold logo, and placed it next to the new documents. Fairness, I whispered, is finally learning to read the fine print. The next morning, Jason arrived right on time, a rare occurrence. He looked sharp, well-rested, confident. He even brought a small box of pastries. Peace offering, he said, with that grin of his. Let's get it done, I said. We sat at the kitchen table, the morning light reflecting off the polished wood. He laid out his version of the agreement while I placed the mirror contract beside it. He barely noticed the difference. You've already signed, he asked. Right there, I said, pointing to the spot. He scanned the first page, then stopped halfway through the second. Wait. Why does this say it's just the bank's phrasing? I interrupted. Keeps things tidy for liability purposes. He nodded, distracted, then smiled. You've still got the old touch, always reading the details. Yes, I said quietly. Always. He signed without hesitation, his pen gliding smoothly across the line. The notary stamped both copies, and just like that, the trap was set. When he left, I stood at the window watching him drive off, still smug in his borrowed confidence. For the first time in years, I didn't feel anger, just certainty. Later that afternoon, Mark called. He signed, he did. Mark laughed softly. Then, all we need now is for him to make the next move. Once he leverages your name, the reversal clause activates automatically. Then it's done, I said. Not yet, Mark replied. Patience, Henry. Justice moves like water, it finds the cracks. That night, as I reviewed the documents again, Clara called. Her voice was strained. Henry, is Jason with you? No, I said. Why? She hesitated. He's been tense, snapping at everyone. He said something about new investors and that everything's finally under control. But he looked scared. Fear can look a lot like confidence, I said. She sighed. He won't listen to anyone. Not me, not his father-in-law. Maybe he'll listen to you. Maybe I said. But he'll have to hear the lesson first. After we hung up, I sat at my desk and opened my old engineering journal again. I flipped past sketches of bridges and notes about stress loads until I found a blank page. I wrote, "The strength of a structure depends on its foundation. The strength of a man depends on his truth." By midnight, the rain had stopped. The city outside was silent, save for the hum of distant traffic. I turned off the lights, but didn't go to bed. I sat there in the dark, watching the red glow of the clock move toward morning. When dawn came, I made another call to the bank this time. I confirmed that Jason's company had recently listed my name as guarantor for a new line of credit. The reversal clause was now legally in motion. Mark texted me a single word: activated. I exhaled slowly. Years of submission, humiliation, and blind love, all reduced to one calm breath. That evening, I poured a second glass of whiskey, left the documents neatly stacked on the table, and went out to the porch. The air smelled of wet cedar and freedom. Across the street, the maple leaves shimmered in the fading light. I whispered to myself, "He'll think he's winning. That's good. Let him." The wind shifted cool and steady, and for the first time in a long time, I felt something close to peace. Not the fragile kind that comes from pretending things are fine, but the solid kind, the kind that comes from knowing the foundation beneath you is unshakable. Somewhere, Jason was probably celebrating, thinking his problems were solved. He had no idea the lesson had already begun. When I finally went back inside, I pinned a piece of paper to the corkboard above my desk. In the middle, I wrote 3 words in thick black ink: "Blueprint for Fairness." The rain started again just as I turned off the light. I sat for a moment in the dark, listening to it fall steady and sure, washing the city clean. 2 days later, I sat in my truck outside the Walker Travel office, watching through the glass walls as my son moved like a man who believed the world owed him comfort. The lobby gleamed polished marble floors, silver logo on the wall. A receptionist who looked too nervous to make eye contact. Jason's kingdom for now. I hadn't planned to come, but Mark had called that morning with a tone I hadn't heard in years. "He's moving fast, Henry," he'd said. "Filed a new contract, using your name as guarantor. That clause of yours just came alive." Now, as I sat in the parking lot, I could feel it, the hum of justice working quietly beneath the surface. I stepped out of the truck and walked toward the building, each step heavy but deliberate. Jason saw me through the glass and hesitated before forcing a smile. "Dad," he said as I entered. "Didn't expect you here. I figured we should talk face to face," I said. He glanced toward the staff, lingering nearby. "My office," he muttered, leading me past the open cubicles. The walls were plastered with travel photos, Santorini sunsets, Maldives beaches, Paris rooftops, all dreams sold on borrowed money. Once inside, he closed the door. "You can't just show up here," he said. "People talk." "Then let them," I said. "Might save you from having to lie later." He scowled. "Is this about that loan again I told you everything's handled? Is that what you call it when the bank calls to verify ownership changes?" His eyes flickered. "You're not supposed to get those notifications." "But I did," I said. Mark helped make sure of it. Jason's face drained of color. "You talked to Mark." "You had no right." "I had every right," I said sharply. "You used my name, my reputation, and forged my signature. I've got every right there is." He stepped back, running a hand through his hair, forcing a laugh that sounded cracked. "You think you've caught me in some grand conspiracy? Jesus, Dad. You're being paranoid." I pulled a single document from my coat and laid it on his desk. "Then explain this." He leaned over, eyes narrowing as he recognized the page. It was the copy he'd signed, the one with the reversal clause buried in fine print. "I protected myself," I said calmly. "And when you filed that fraudulent credit line, you triggered it. As of this morning, every account, every property, every trademark under Walker Travel Consulting is legally mine." He stared at me speechless for a moment. Then he laughed short and bitter. "You're bluffing. The bank confirmed it an hour ago," I said. "You can call them yourself." Jason's hand hovered over his phone but didn't move. The silence stretched between us, thick and heavy. "You'd really do that to your own son," he whispered. "I didn't do it to you," I said. "You did it to yourself." He sank into his chair, rubbing his temples. You don't understand. If those accounts freeze, I lose everything. The investors will pull out, and the Bensons, they'll see the man behind the suit, I interrupted. Maybe it's time they did. Jason looked up at me, then eyes wet and furious. You think this makes you better than me? You're just punishing me because you couldn't control your own life after Mom died. You're using me as your redemption arc. The words hit hard, but I didn't flinch. You're wrong, I said quietly. I'm not punishing you. I'm teaching you what your mother taught me. Fairness isn't always gentle. He slammed his fist against the desk. You've ruined me. No, I said, turning toward the door. I've stopped you from ruining everyone else. When I stepped back into the hallway, the receptionist looked up nervously. Is everything all right, Mr. Walker? Better than it's been in years, I said and walked out. Outside, the sky had cleared, sunlight spilling through the clouds. I didn't feel triumphant, just steady. The kind of steadiness that comes after you've been standing in a storm too long and finally realize the ground beneath you hasn't washed away. I called Mark from the parking lot. It's done, I said. He exhaled sharply. Good. I'll finalize the filings. You'll get full transfer confirmation by the end of the week. Thank you. He hesitated. You sound calm. I am, I said. Because this isn't about revenge. It's about balance. Later that evening, I drove out past the edge of town to the old pier where I used to take Jason fishing. The wood was still damp from the morning rain. I sat at the end, letting my feet dangle above the water. The wind smelled of salt and memory. When Jason was 10, he'd caught a fish so small, he wanted to throw it back. It's not fair, he'd said. It didn't even fight. I'd told him fairness wasn't about the fight. It was about knowing when to hold on and when to let go. He'd nodded, pretending to understand. Now I wondered if either of us ever really had. My phone buzzed. A message from Clara. He's furious. He's calling everyone, trying to fix it. But he's scared, Henry. I've never seen him scared before. Then maybe he's learning, I replied. I watched the waves crash against the pilings, steady and relentless. Somewhere far away, my son was pacing his glass office, calling lawyers, yelling into the void. And somewhere beneath that chaos, maybe a lesson was sinking in. By the time the sun began to dip, I stood and looked out over the water one last time. My reflection shimmered in the darkening waves, older lined, but still whole. On the drive home, I passed the sign for Walker Travel. The name would change soon, back to mine. It wasn't pride that filled me, but a quiet relief. I hadn't wanted this war, but if war had to come, I'd fought it clean. When I got home, the house was quiet except for the ticking of the clock in the hall. I poured a glass of whiskey, sat at the table, and opened my notebook again. Beneath the last entry, I wrote a single line. Fairness begins with truth, ends with peace. I set down the pen and leaned back, listening to the stillness settle around me. For the first time in a long while, I felt something shift inside. Not victory, not satisfaction, just a calm awareness that the storm was moving on. The bridge hadn't been destroyed after all. It had only been rebuilt stronger this time, with weight distributed where it belonged. Tomorrow, I'd deal with the lawyers, the banks, the questions. Tonight, I let the silence do the talking. The phone rang just after dawn. I knew it would be him before I even looked at the screen. Jason's voice came through hoarse and uneven. Dad, you need to fix this. Right now. I set my mug down slowly. Good morning to you too. Don't do that, he snapped. This isn't funny. The bank froze every account this morning. My partners can't access payroll, vendors are calling. And the Bensons, he stopped to breathe. They're threatening to pull their investment. I let the silence stretch, listening to his shallow breathing on the other end. So I said, finally you've seen what fairness looks like when it shows up on your doorstep. Fairness, he laughed bitterly. You're destroying me, no. Jason, I said quietly, I'm setting the record straight. He didn't reply right away. Then softer, almost pleading, Dad, please. We can fix this together. I just need some time. Time's what you had, I said. You spent it. He cursed under his breath, muttering something about betrayal, about how I'd embarrassed him. Then the line went dead. I sat there for a long while, staring out the kitchen window at the faint light breaking through the clouds. The neighborhood was waking up, kids waiting for school buses, joggers passing by, the smell of rain on concrete. I felt strangely calm. Maybe because for the first time I wasn't reacting. I was deciding. By mid-morning, the storm hit. Calls from reporters, emails from former colleagues, even a message from Thomas Benson himself. Call me immediately. When I didn't respond, he called again. His voice was cold, deliberate. Mr. Walker, I assume you know the chaos your son's caused. We've been patient with him because of his connection to your family, but this, he paused. This will not end well for him or for you. I smiled faintly. I'm not sure what you mean, Mr. Benson. I mean, he said we'll be filing to recover damages. Walker Travel owes more than it can pay. Then I suggest you speak with its current owner, I said. The silence on the other end was sharp. You legally, yes. I'm the sole proprietor now. He exhaled long and frustrated. What's your endgame, Walker Revenge Correction? I said simply, then hung up. An hour later, Mark arrived, raincoat dripping on my floor. Congratulations, he said, shaking his head. You're now the proud owner of a bankrupt travel company. I smirked. I'm aware. He dropped a folder on the table. Here's everything you need to shut it down properly. Liquidate assets, settle debts, make it clean. I flipped through the papers, my finger tracing each line. How bad is it? Bad, he said. Your son didn't just overextend. He gambled on high-risk partnerships. There are loans under shell names, transfers to offshore accounts, invoices for things that don't exist. So he built a house of cards, I murmured. Mark sighed. And you just blew the roof off. I nodded. Then let's finish what he started properly this time. For the next few days, I worked like a man possessed. Every file, every account, every deal, I pulled them apart and rebuilt them from the ground up. It was like engineering again, only this time the structure was made of paper and pride instead of steel. In the middle of it all, Clara called. Her voice was trembling. Henry, he's falling apart. Where is he? I asked. At home. He's barely sleeping. Keeps saying you're going to ruin him. He's already done that himself. I know, she said, her voice breaking. But you're still his father. That word father hung in the air like a weight I couldn't set down. I'll see him, I said finally. When I arrived at their house that evening, the lights were off, except for a single lamp in the living room. Jason sat on the couch, unshaven, still in yesterday's clothes. The TV played a muted news segment, his name scrolling across the ticker. He looked up at me with hollow eyes. You came to watch me fall? I came to see if you'd stand, I said. He laughed without humor. You took everything. What else do you want? I want you to understand why, I said. Every bridge you burned, every lie you told, every dollar you stole, it wasn't about money. It was about power. You learned to take, not to earn. I learned from you, he snapped. From watching you bow to everyone your whole life, your bosses, your clients. You called it respect. I called it weakness. I sat down across from him. Then you've spent your life proving me wrong. How's that working out? He didn't answer. The silence between us was heavier than anger. You can rebuild, I said finally. But not with shortcuts. Not with other people's names on your paperwork. He stared at the floor. What if it's too late? It's only too late when you stop telling the truth, I said. Start there. When I left, Clara was standing in the hallway, her eyes red. Thank you, she whispered. For what? For not yelling. I gave her a tired smile. He's got enough noise in his head already. The next morning, I met Mark at the bank to finalize the transition. The bank manager, a polite woman in her 50s, looked at me over her glasses. Mr. Walker, do you wish to maintain the company accounts or dissolve them? Dissolve, I said. Everyone. Her pen hovered for a second. Are you sure? This effectively ends Walker Travel Consulting as a business entity? That's exactly the point, I said. When I signed the last document, something inside me loosened. Not joy, not triumph, just release. By the end of the week, Jason's name was off every ledger, every license, every account. The empire he'd built on borrowed trust was gone, reduced to files in a banker's drawer. On Sunday evening, I drove out to the cliffs above Lake Washington. The wind was cold, carrying the smell of rain and pine. I sat on a bench overlooking the water, the city lights shimmering across the surface. I thought about the boy who used to sit beside me here, tossing pebbles into the lake, asking endless questions about bridges, about balance, about fairness. He was gone. But maybe, just maybe, a man might rise where that boy had fallen. I took out my notebook and wrote a final line under the week's entries. Fairness isn't payback. It's proof that you can stand on level ground after the storm. Then I closed the book, leaned back, and let the wind wash over me. The city below was quiet. Somewhere out there, my son was facing the world without safety nets for the first time in his life. And for the first time in mine, I didn't feel sorry. I felt peace. The call came at 7 in the morning. I was halfway through my first cup of coffee when the voice on the line said, Mr. Walker, this is Evergreen Bank. We need to inform you that all accounts under Walker Travel Consulting have been transferred per your authorization. The ownership verification is complete. I thanked her, hung up, and sat for a long moment in silence. The world outside was just waking up, birds in the maple tree, a newspaper thudding onto the porch, the hum of a passing car. It all felt strangely normal, considering how much had just changed. Then the phone rang again. This time the voice was familiar. Dad. Jason sounded like he hadn't slept in days. What the hell did you do? I didn't do anything, I said evenly. You did. The bank just caught up. He swore under his breath. You can't just take my company. That's theft. It's not theft when it's mine, I said. You tricked me. No, I replied. You signed without reading. There's a difference. He was breathing hard. You don't get it, do you? This isn't just about money. Those investors are sharks. If I can't pay them back, then maybe you shouldn't have borrowed from them, I said. Dad, they're not the kind of people you say no to. I felt a chill crawl up my spine. Then you'd better start learning. There was a pause, then his voice dropped small and desperate. Please, Dad. Just transfer some of it back. I'll fix everything. I already did, I said. I fixed it. He went quiet for a few seconds. Then the line went dead. I sat there staring at the black screen of the phone, feeling the quiet settle over the room like dust. Outside, the day was turning gold through the window. But I couldn't shake the image of his voice. Yes, you can hear a voice in your head like a ghost. By mid-afternoon, Mark came over with a folder under his arm. They confirmed it, he said. You're the legal owner. He can't undo it, not without your consent. I don't want to undo it, I said. I just want it finished. Careful, Mark said, taking a seat across from me. He's desperate. Desperate people do stupid things. He already has. Mark rubbed his chin. Then what now? I thought for a moment, then said, now we let the dust settle. Fairness isn't a sprint. That night I sat on the porch with a glass of bourbon, watching the rain fall in thin silver lines under the streetlight. My phone buzzed again, but this time it wasn't Jason, it was Clara. Henry, she said softly, he's losing it. He's calling people non-stop, trying to borrow, trying to threaten. He keeps saying you destroyed him. He destroyed himself, I said. I know, she whispered, but he doesn't. He keeps talking about fairness, how you turned the word against him. I took a slow breath. Maybe that's what it takes for him to understand it. She was quiet for a long moment. He won't sleep. He hasn't eaten. I'm scared of what he might do. Where is he at the house? I locked myself in the guest room. He's downstairs pacing. You should hear the way he talks now. It's like he's not even the same person. I clenched my jaw. Call the police if you feel unsafe, Clara. Promise me. I will, she said. But please, talk to him if you can. He still listens to you, even when he pretends not to. After the call ended, I sat there for a while, the sound of rain filling the silence. Then I poured out the rest of the bourbon, grabbed my coat, and drove. The house looked different in the dark. The lights were on, but the place had that strange emptiness you can feel even from the street, like it's filled with noise, but no warmth. I rang the bell once, no answer. Then I opened the door with the spare key Clara had given me years ago. Jason was in the kitchen, hunched over the counter with his head in his hands. Empty bottles and papers littered the table. He looked up when he heard me, eyes red and wild. You came, he said flatly. To see what's left of me? I came to make sure you're alive. He laughed a sound that cracked in the middle. Alive barely. You win, Dad. Congratulations. The empire's yours. The sun's ruined. You finally got your fairness. I stepped closer, my voice steady. You think this is winning? Look around you, Jason. There's nothing here to win. He slammed his fist on the counter. You don't understand. I did everything for family, for reputation. For you, I wanted to make you proud. Proud, I said softly. By lying, by forging my name, by pretending debt was legacy. He staggered toward me, pointing a trembling hand. You always judged me. You never believed in me. That's why I had to prove I was better. Better doesn't mean richer, I said. He stared at me, chest heaving. What do you want from me? Accountability, I said. And maybe humility. He dropped onto a chair, his energy collapsing all at once. For a moment he looked like a little boy again, lost and angry and scared. They're going to come after me, he muttered. You don't know these people. They'll destroy me. Then you go to the police, I said. You tell them the truth. He laughed again, hollow and tired. Truth doesn't work in my world anymore, Dad. It's all leverage and perception. Then maybe it's time you find a new world, I said. He looked up at me, then something breaking behind his eyes. Why couldn't you just love me enough to save me? My throat tightened. I did, I said quietly. This is me saving you. He turned away, pressing his palms against his face. I stood there watching him unravel, feeling the years of distance between us folding in on themselves. There was nothing left to say. When I finally left, I didn't look back. The rain had stopped, leaving the air cold and clean. The streetlights reflected off puddles like shards of glass. By the time I reached home, dawn was creeping over the city again. The phone buzzed once more, Mark this time. The transfer's been verified internationally, he said. Every trace of his fraudulent accounts points back to him. You're completely clear. Good, I said. What now? Now, I said, Looking out at the first pale line of sunrise, he learns what fair really means. I set the phone down and sat by the window until the light filled the room. Outside, the city moved on like nothing had happened. Inside, I knew everything had. Fairness wasn't loud. It didn't demand applause. It just waited patient, steady, inevitable until the day the balance was restored. The knock came just after sunset. 3 sharp raps against the wooden door, heavy enough to shake the frame. I already knew who it was before I opened it. The air outside carried that damp chill. Seattle always gets before the rain, and in it stood Jason, soaked unshaven, his eyes wild with exhaustion and something darker. "Dad," he said, voice raw, "we need to talk." I stepped aside without a word. He brushed past me, dripping onto the hardwood, his hands trembling slightly. The smell of whiskey followed him in. "You look like hell," I said quietly. He turned, half laughing, half breaking. "You did this. You took everything from me, and now you're surprised? I don't look like I've been to a spa." I stayed still, watching him pace. "I didn't take anything. You didn't hand over yourself." He stopped. "You call that fairness? That's exactly what it is," I said. For a second, neither of us spoke. The house was silent, except for the sound of rain beginning to tap the windows. He looked around, eyes scanning the walls, as if searching for something familiar, something he still owned. I lost everything he said, finally. "The company, the house. Clara, she's gone. The kids are with her parents. And the Bensons. They've cut me off completely. I'm a joke now, Dad. My name means nothing." I took a deep breath. Maybe that's the start of something new. He stared at me, disbelief flashing in his eyes. "You think this is some kind of lesson? It's the only kind that might stick." He walked closer, his voice dropping low. "Do you even hear yourself? You destroyed me." "No, Jason," I said calmly. "I stopped you from destroying everyone else." He pressed his palms against the kitchen table, leaning forward, shaking. "You think you're the hero in this story, don't you?" "I don't believe in heroes," I said. "Just choices." The room filled with the sound of rain growing heavier. Lightning flashed outside, painting the walls white for a second before the thunder rolled through. Jason's voice cracked when he spoke again. "You were supposed to protect me. You're my father." "I did protect you," I said, "for far too long. And that protection turned into permission. You mistook it for approval." He laughed, a sharp, bitter sound. "You really think this is justice?" "Justice doesn't need to be loud," I said softly. "It just needs to be right." He looked like he wanted to argue, but couldn't find the words. His shoulders sagged, and for the first time since he was a boy, I saw fear in his eyes. Not anger, not defiance, just fear. "You don't know what it's like," he said, voice trembling. "You don't know what it feels like to be me, to grow up in your shadow knowing I could never be enough." My chest tightened. "I never wanted you to be me, Jason. I wanted you to be better." His voice cracked again. "Better? You call this better? I spent my whole life trying to earn your respect. And when I finally built something, you tore it down." "What you built was rotten," I said. "It would have collapsed on its own." He sat down, elbows on his knees, rubbing his face. "I don't even know who I am anymore." "You're a man standing at the bottom," I said. "That's not the end. That's the start." He looked up at me, confusion mixing with anger. "You think I can just start over?" "Yes," I said, "if you stop lying to yourself, to everyone else. You've spent years chasing power and approval. You forgot what it means to have purpose." He stood, suddenly slamming his fist on the table. "Don't preach to me. You think you've got it all figured out because you finally got the upper hand." "This isn't about winning," I said quietly. It's about ending the cycle. He froze. What cycle? The one your grandfather started. The one I kept going. The one where the men in this family measure worth by control instead of character. Jason looked at me stunned, like I'd peeled something raw open inside him. I stepped closer, my voice low but steady. I let your mother down by enabling my own pride. I let you believe that love meant always saying yes. That's not love. It's cowardice. He looked away, his jaw tightening, but I could see the cracks forming. His breathing slowed, his shoulders lowering just slightly. And what now? He asked. You think a speech fixes this? No, I said. But maybe it starts something. We stood there in silence as the storm outside softened into drizzle. The tension in the air shifted, not gone, but changing shape. He wiped his face with the back of his hand, embarrassed by the gesture. Do you hate me? He asked suddenly. I shook my head. No. I'm angry. I'm disappointed. But hate, no. You're still my son. He swallowed hard, then nodded once, like that was something he hadn't expected to hear. He took a deep breath, steadying himself. You really think I can come back from this? Only if you stop trying to climb on other people's shoulders, I said. Start on your own ground. He looked around the house again, the walls lined with photos, his childhood, his mother, the life we once had. His eyes lingered on one picture in particular, the two of us on the pier, holding fishing rods, both smiling. We used to be happy, he said. We can be again, I said. But it has to mean something this time. He gave a faint, broken laugh. You always make it sound so simple. It's not simple, I said. It's just right. He nodded, looking down at his hands. For the first time, he looked smaller, human, stripped of the arrogance that used to armor him. When he finally stood, his voice was quiet. I'll try. That's all I need to hear, I said. He walked to the door, paused, and turned back. You really believe in fairness, that much I do, I said, but not the kind you toast at parties. The kind you earn when you face yourself. He nodded again, eyes red, and left without another word. I stood there for a long time, listening to the sound of his car fade down the street. The rain had stopped, and through the window the sky was breaking open, thin stripes of gold, spreading behind the clouds. When the silence returned, I poured a glass of water, sat at the kitchen table, and opened my notebook. On a blank page I wrote, when fairness finally arrives, it doesn't shout. It just stays. I set the pen down, feeling the weight of years lift slightly off my shoulders. The house was quiet again, but it wasn't empty. Not anymore. The rain had stopped by morning, but the sky still hung low and gray over downtown Seattle. I parked across from the Walker Travel Building and sat for a moment watching people hurry through the revolving doors, clutching umbrellas and coffee cups, all of them unaware that everything inside those glass walls was about to change. When I stepped into the lobby, the air was thick with tension. A receptionist I didn't recognize greeted me with a nervous smile. Mr. Walker, she said softly. They're expecting you upstairs. They? I asked. The auditors? And your son. The elevator ride was silent, except for the hum of the cables. I could feel my heartbeat echo in the small space, steady but heavy. When the doors opened, Jason was standing near the conference room, flanked by two men in dark suits, representatives from the state financial board. His face looked drawn paler than I'd ever seen it. Dad, he said, trying for composure. What are you doing here, making sure everything's fair? I said. One of the investigators turned toward me. Mr. Henry Walker. You're here as legal owner of Walker Travel Consulting, correct? That's right. Jason's jaw tightened. He's not part of this. This is between me and my partners. The investigator shook his head. Not anymore, Mr. Walker. The ownership transfer you signed last week places your father in full control. That makes him part of every conversation. Jason shot me a look, half fury, half disbelief. You planned this. I didn't answer. I just followed the auditors into the conference room. The walls were lined with framed photographs, Jason smiling with clients, ribbon cuttings, awards for innovation. They all felt like echoes of a lie. One of the auditors opened a file. We've been reviewing your recent transactions. There are several discrepancies between reported assets and actual holdings. Some of the accounts are listed under your father's authorization, though the activity clearly didn't come from him. Jason rubbed his forehead, his voice low. Look, this was all a misunderstanding. We had outside contractors handling the transfers. That's not what the records show, the auditors said. Funds were moved into your personal accounts. Over $200,000. The silence that followed was suffocating. Jason's hands shook as he tried to steady a pen that wasn't there. You're twisting this. It was meant as reimbursement temporary. I spoke quietly. You forged my signature. Nothing about that was temporary. Jason glared at me, his eyes bloodshot. You think you're saving me, but you're humiliating me. I'm not humiliating you, I said. You did that yourself. He laughed bitterly. You really believe that? You think I meant for this to happen? I was trying to keep the company afloat while you sat in your little workshop pretending the world didn't change. The world changed, I said. But honesty didn't. One of the auditors cleared his throat. Mr. Walker will need to review all financial documents and correspondence related to these transactions. There may be further questions after that. Jason slumped in his chair, staring at the polished table. You've got everything you need, he muttered. The meeting dragged on for hours. I answered what I could, left the rest for the lawyers. By the end of it, Jason looked hollow, like the air had gone out of him. When the investigators left, it was just the two of us. You wanted fairness, he said, his voice quiet but sharp. Well, here it is. I took a deep breath. Fairness isn't revenge, Jason. It's truth. He leaned back, eyes glinting. Truth. You've always hidden behind that word like it made you noble. You're just as selfish as I am. You just hide it better. Maybe, I said. But at least I know what I am. He stood abruptly, pacing the length of the room. You don't get it, do you? I built this place from nothing. Every deal, every client, I made it happen. And you just walked in with one signature and took it all. I didn't take it, I said. I reclaimed it. You turned it into something it was never meant to be. He stopped, his hands gripping the back of a chair. You think this makes you the better man? I don't want to be better, I said. I want to be done. For a moment he just looked at me, breathing hard. Then his voice dropped to a whisper. You'll regret this. Maybe, I said. But at least I'll be able to sleep. I left him there, standing among the wreckage of his empire. The sound of rain returned as I stepped outside, soft but relentless, washing the city clean. By the time I reached the parking lot, reporters were gathering, drawn by the scent of scandal. One called out, Mr. Walker, is this true? Did your son commit fraud under your name? I paused, turned slightly toward the cameras. No comment, I said. Except this fairness always finds its way. The flashbulbs went off like lightning. I walked to my truck, ignoring the questions that followed me down the street. When I got home, Mark was waiting on the porch. I saw the news, he said quietly. You handled it well. Handled, I repeated, setting down my keys. That's one word for it. He studied me for a moment. You don't look happy. I'm not, I admitted. Justice doesn't feel like victory. It feels like cleanup. He nodded slowly. So what now? I finish it, I said. Dissolve what's left. Pay off whoever needs paying. Close every account. Then I start over. Mark smiled faintly. Starting over at 65. That's bold. Maybe, I said, but it's honest. Later that night, I stood by the window with the lights off, watching the rain streak down the glass. Somewhere across town, Jason was probably still in that office, surrounded by files, watching his life come apart one sheet of paper at a time. I felt no joy, no vengeance, just a quiet exhaustion that settled deep into my bones. When the phone rang again, I almost didn't answer. But it was Clara. Her voice was soft, careful. "He's home," she said. "He's quiet. Scared, I think. Maybe that's good." "Maybe," I said. "I don't know what happens next," she admitted. "Neither do I said. "But maybe that's the point." After the call, I picked up my notebook and wrote, "Fairness doesn't end when you win. It ends when you stop needing to." I closed the book and set it aside. Outside, thunder rolled across the city, slow and distant. And for the first time in years, I felt the storm wasn't coming for me. It was leaving. The headline hit the newsstands the next morning. "Businessman Jason Walker, under investigation for fraud ownership, returned to father." I read it once, folded the paper, and set it on the counter beside my coffee. My hands didn't shake, but something inside me did a quiet tremor that wasn't pride or guilt, just the weight of finality. By noon, the world had already decided who we were. Some called me the wise father who restored justice. Others painted me as a ruthless old man who humiliated his only son. Talk shows debated morality while strangers online picked sides like it was a sport. Mark called just before lunch. "You've gone viral," he said dryly. "I never wanted to be a headline," I said. "No one does," he replied. "You're trending for the wrong reasons and the right ones. Depends who's watching. I don't care what they say." He paused. "Then you're already better than most." But I did care, at least a little. Every opinion carried a piece of misunderstanding. People saw a father and a son at war, but they didn't see the years that led up to it, the small cuts, the manipulation, the silence mistaken for peace. By mid-afternoon, a camera crew appeared outside my gate. The reporters shouted questions while I trimmed the hedge, pretending not to hear. "Mr. Walker, did you steal your son's company? Is this revenge or justice?" I looked up. Once met her gaze and said simply, "Sometimes fairness just takes longer than people expect." Then I went back to the hedge. That night, I couldn't sleep. I turned on the TV and flipped through the channels until I found a local business panel discussing the Walker case. One commentator said I was an inspiration for standing up for integrity. Another called me a relic from another era who doesn't understand modern business. I turned off the TV. The silence that followed was almost comforting. The phone rang. "Clara." "Henry," she said quietly. "He's not doing well. He won't leave the house, won't talk to anyone. Every time he sees your name on the news, he turns off the TV and just sits there." "Has he eaten?" "I make food, but it just sits on the table. He looks like a ghost. Clara, you can't carry that weight for him." "I know," she whispered. "But I keep thinking maybe you could talk to him. Not as an enemy, just as his father." I rubbed my eyes. I already did. The rest is up to him. After we hung up, I stared at the clock on the wall. 11:42 p.m., the sound of rain on the roof returned steady and rhythmic. I thought about how peace always looks calm from the outside, but is built on chaos beneath. By morning, my inbox was full, reporters, ex-clients, even strangers. One email stood out. The subject line read, "You did the right thing." It was from a man named Arthur, someone I'd once worked with decades ago. He wrote, "You reminded people like me that integrity doesn't retire. You made me call my own son today." We hadn't spoken in years. I sat back surprised at the knot in my throat. Maybe some good could come out of this after all. Later that day, Mark stopped by with lunch and a bottle of scotch. "You need to celebrate," he said. "I don't feel like celebrating," he grinned. "You never do. But this isn't about you, it's about closure." We ate in silence for a while. Outside, the sun broke through the clouds for the first time in days. Mark poured us each a small drink. "To fairness," he said. I raised my glass halfway. "To peace," I corrected. He studied me. "You really think you found it?" "Not yet," I said. "But at least I stopped losing it every day." That night, I walked through the empty halls of the company one last time. The building was quiet now. No hum of conversation, no phones ringing, no Jason barking orders from behind glass walls. I stood in the conference room, where everything had fallen apart, and looked out at the city. The reflection in the window was an old man, tired but unbroken. I whispered to the empty room, "This is what fairness looks like when the noise is gone." The next morning, I officially dissolved Walker Travel Consulting. The bank manager slid the final document across the desk. "Sign here, Mr. Walker. Once this is processed, the company will cease to exist." I hesitated for a moment, then signed. The pen felt heavier than it should have. "Congratulations," she said gently. "Most people don't get to end their story on their own terms." "Maybe it's not the end," I said. "Maybe it's the cleanup before the next chapter." When I stepped outside, the air smelled of salt and asphalt. Seattle's skyline shimmered faintly through the haze. I walked to the waterfront, sat on a bench, and watched the ferries glide across the gray water. For the first time in years, I felt something close to peace, not victory, not satisfaction, just the quiet relief of being done. That evening, the phone rang again. It was Clara. "He's left the house," she said. "He went to see a lawyer. Maybe he's finally trying to face it." "Good," I said. "He needs to." "He also said he doesn't hate you anymore," she added softly. "He said you were right." I didn't answer right away. The sound of rain started again, faint against the window. "Thank you, Clara," I said finally. After the call, I wrote one last note in my journal. "Justice is noisy, peace is quiet, but both have their cost." When I closed the notebook, I noticed the folded newspaper still sitting on the counter. I picked it up, glanced once more at the headline, then crumpled it and threw it into the fireplace. The paper caught instantly the flames, rising bright and brief before fading into ash. Outside, the city lights shimmered through the drizzle, soft and distant. I stood at the window, watching them blur into gold streaks. Somewhere out there, Jason was learning what it meant to start over. And for the first time, I didn't feel the need to guide him or fix him. Peace, I realized, wasn't something you found. It was something you stopped fighting against. I poured one last drink and raised it quietly to the empty room. "To fairness," I said under my breath. "The long, quiet kind." The morning sun filtered through the curtains, spilling gold across the kitchen table. For the first time in months, there was no phone ringing, no lawyer calling, no echo of unfinished business hovering over my head. The house was quiet except for the slow drip of the coffee maker and the soft rustle of pages as I opened my notebook. On the first clean sheet I wrote, "Legacy begins when justice no longer needs defending." I stared at the words for a while, then smiled faintly. Maybe that's what this chapter of life was supposed to be, not about fixing or fighting, but about building something that could outlast both. Later that day, Mark stopped by carrying a paper bag and 2 coffees. "You're free," he said, handing me one. "No more court dates, no more signatures. You're officially just an old man with nothing left to lose." "I'll drink to that," I said, taking a sip. He studied me for a second. You know, most people after something like this would move to Florida and take up golf. Golf's never been my game, I said. Too quiet for someone who's already lived in silence. Mark grinned. Then what's next? You going to reinvent yourself again? I looked out the window where the garden glowed in the late morning sun. Maybe. I'm thinking of building something new. Not for profit this time for people. He raised an eyebrow. People those who've been through what I have. Parents, retirees, anyone who's been taken advantage of because they trusted too much. Mark leaned back impressed. A foundation, huh? I've been calling it Fair Foundations, I said. A place where people can learn how to protect what's theirs. Maybe it helps someone keep their savings, or their dignity, or both. Mark whistled softly. That's ambitious. Justice should be, I said. 2 weeks later, I attended a support meeting at the community center. Mostly older men and women who'd been scammed, manipulated, or left with nothing after years of trust. I didn't speak at first. I just listened. One man talked about how his son sold his house without telling him. Another woman said her daughter convinced her to sign a temporary power of attorney. Every story felt like an echo of mine told in different voices, in smaller tragedies that sounded far too familiar. When the group leader asked if anyone else wanted to share, I found myself raising my hand. I'm Henry, I said simply. I lost my savings, my pride, and for a while I thought I'd lost my son too. But I learned something along the way. Fairness isn't revenge. It's responsibility. It starts when you stop letting guilt make your decisions. The room was quiet. Then someone clapped softly at first, then others joined in. Afterward, a woman came up and said, "You should teach." People need to hear this from someone who lived it. By the time I drove home, the idea had already taken root. A month later, Fair Foundations opened its doors in a small rented office downtown. Nothing fancy, just a few desks, a printer, and a whiteboard where I wrote, "Protect your story," before someone rewrites it. At our first session, only 6 people showed up. By the third, we had 30. I taught them how to read contracts, how to detect scams, how to ask questions without guilt. More importantly, we talked about dignity, the kind that money can't buy back once it's gone. One afternoon, after a class, an envelope arrived at the office. No return address, just my name written in a familiar, careful script. Inside was a single page and a short note. Dad, I don't expect forgiveness, but I want you to know I'm learning. I've been volunteering at a small financial literacy program in Tacoma, helping people avoid mistakes like mine. Maybe one day I'll be someone you can be proud of again. Jason. I read it twice, maybe 3 times. My hands didn't shake, but my eyes did blur a little. For the first time since all of it began, I felt something that wasn't anger or relief. It was peace. Real solid peace. That night I told Mark about the letter. He smiled. Looks like the apple might have hit the ground and started growing roots again. Maybe, I said. But I'm not waiting for fruit. It's enough to see the soil turning. A few weeks later, Fair Foundations hosted its first community event. I stood on a small stage microphone, trembling slightly in my hand, looking out at a sea of faces, men and women of all ages who had lost and rebuilt each, carrying their own version of my story. Good evening, I began. My name is Henry Walker. Some of you might have read my name in the paper last year, though not for reasons I'm proud of. But if you're here tonight, you already know what it means to fall and stand again. A ripple of quiet laughter moved through the room. I spent most of my life believing fairness was about balance. I continued. But balance only works when both sides want to hold steady. Sometimes fairness is about letting go, so the weight stops crushing you. A woman in the front row nodded, tears glinting in her eyes. learned the hard way that protecting others isn't always love. Sometimes love means stepping back and letting someone face their own consequences. And sometimes, I said, my voice softening, it means forgiving yourself for letting it go too far. When I finished, they stood and applauded. Not the kind of applause that comes from admiration, but from recognition. It was the sound of people who understood. Afterward, an older man came up to me, shaking my hand with both of his. "I thought I was alone in this," he said. "You made me realize I'm not." I smiled. Neither was I. I just didn't know it yet. That night I sat on the porch with Mark, watching the streetlights flicker on. The air was crisp and the world felt softer somehow. "You ever think you'd end up here?" he asked. "Not like this," I said. "But maybe exactly where I'm supposed to be." He chuckled. "So what's next for the great Henry Walker?" I took a sip of coffee, considering it. "I think I'll keep building bridges. Not the kind made of steel, the kind that connect people who think they're too broken to cross." He nodded. "That's one hell of a legacy." I looked out at the quiet street, the glow of Fair Foundation's sign visible through the window. "No," I said softly. "It's just fairness done right this time." When I went inside, I opened my notebook again and wrote one final line before turning out the light. Legacy isn't what you leave behind. It's what finally stops you from carrying the past. A year had passed since the storm, and Seattle was dressed in the soft gold of early autumn. The city felt quieter now, or maybe it was just me learning how to listen differently. I stood in my kitchen, adjusting my tie, watching sunlight glint off the framed photo on the counter, me and Jason years ago, both grinning with fishing rods in hand. Back then, the world still felt simple. Tonight wasn't about the past, though. It was the one-year anniversary dinner for Fair Foundations. Mark had insisted on hosting it downtown, said it would remind people that doing good could still look classy. I'd agreed, mostly because I knew he'd already booked the restaurant before asking. When I arrived, the room was warm, with laughter and low music. Former students, volunteers, a few donors, all of them gathered around tables draped in white. For once, it didn't feel like a courtroom or a board meeting. It felt like family. Mark saw me at the door and waved me over. "Look who decided to show up on time for his own party," he teased. I figured I'd try something new. I said, shaking his hand. "Don't make it a habit." He grinned, then raised his glass toward the room. "Everyone, the man who taught us that fairness doesn't come free. Henry Walker." Applause rippled through the room. I felt the usual mix of discomfort and gratitude. I never liked being the center of attention, but tonight, it didn't sting. It just felt earned. I spent the next hour talking to guests. One woman told me Fair Foundations had helped her stop her grandson from selling her house behind her back. A retired teacher said he'd started volunteering because of something I said in my first seminar. You can't rebuild trust until you stop renting your peace. When I sat down to catch my breath, Clara approached. I hadn't seen her in months. She looked tired, but there was a calm in her eyes that hadn't been there before. "I almost didn't come," she said. "I'm glad you did," I replied. She hesitated. "Jason wanted me to bring you something." She handed me a small wooden box. Inside was a bottle of wine, old and familiar. I turned it over and saw a note tied to the neck with a thin ribbon for the next toast. "You taught me what fairness really means. Jay." For a long moment I couldn't speak. The room faded into a blur of voices and soft music. I set the box down carefully, like it might break if I breathed too hard. Clara touched my arm. "He's doing better," she said. "He got a steady job, moved into a smaller place. He's not the same man, Henry. I think you'll see that someday." "Maybe someday," I said quietly. Later, Mark clinked his glass again. All right, folks. One last toast before we call it a night. Henry, I think this one's yours. I stood slowly, feeling every eye turned toward me. My voice came steady but softer than usual. A year ago, I thought fairness meant evening the scales. But I've learned it's about balance, not weight. It's about knowing when to hold on and when to let go. The room was silent, except for the sound of glasses shifting. I raised mine slightly. To everyone here who's ever been broken, betrayed, or underestimated, thank you for reminding me that fairness isn't revenge. It's growth. It's peace earned one decision at a time. Someone murmured a quiet amen from the back, and we all drank. After the applause faded, I stepped outside for some air. The city glowed under the streetlights, and the faint hum of traffic mixed with laughter spilling from the restaurant windows. I opened the wooden box again, looking at the bottle Jason had sent. I could almost hear his voice, half nervous, half proud, saying, "You taught me fairness, Dad." Maybe he had finally started to understand. Maybe I had too. A soft breeze carried the smell of rain and cedar. I looked up at the sky, and for a moment the clouds broke just enough to reveal a few stars. The kind of small, stubborn light you can only see when you stop fighting the dark. Mark came out, slipping a hand into his coat pocket. "You planning on standing out here all night?" "Just thinking," I said. "Dangerous habit," he joked. I smiled. "You ever think we'd end up here?" He chuckled. "Not in a million years, but I'll admit you clean up well for a man who once swore he was done with people." I looked back at the restaurant, the faces glowing through the glass. Maybe people were never the problem. Maybe I just forgot how to meet the right ones. Mark nodded toward the bottle in my hand. "That from him, yeah," I said. "He said it was for my next toast." "Then let's give him one," Mark said. "Right here." I smiled faintly, uncorked the bottle, and poured a small amount into each of our glasses. The wine was old but smooth, with a sweetness that lingered longer than I expected. To what Mark asked, I raised my glass toward the city skyline. To fairness, the real kind. We drank in silence, letting the city hum around us. When Mark went back inside, I stayed for a while longer, leaning against the railing, watching the night settle. My phone buzzed in my pocket. A new message. It was from an unknown number, but I knew the tone the moment I read it. "Dad, thank you for not giving up on me when I gave up on myself. I'm proud of you too." I exhaled slowly, pocketed the phone, and looked back toward the horizon. For once, the ache in my chest didn't feel heavy. It felt alive. When I returned home later that night, the house felt warmer than usual. I placed the empty wine bottle beside the photo of me and Jason, both of us frozen in a moment before the world grew complicated. I smiled at the picture, whispered, "We made it, kid," and turned off the light. The next morning, I woke before sunrise, sat by the window, and opened my notebook one last time. On a blank page, I wrote, "Revenge gave me justice. Fairness gave me peace. Peace gave me purpose." I closed the book and set it aside. The sun climbed slowly over the horizon, painting the world in soft gold. The kind of light that doesn't demand attention, it just fills the room quietly, reminding you that new beginnings don't need announcements. I poured myself a cup of coffee, raised it slightly toward the light, and said softly to no one but myself, to fairness and to everything it took to find it. Then I smiled, took a sip, and let the day begin.